I met Mary Beth at New Heights in Sunday school, probably 3rd or 4th grade, and we were quick friends right away. Mary Beth was funny and full of spunk. She found mischief pretty easily, and I enjoyed going along with it. My mom for sure would have described Mary Beth as one of my more spirited friends.
Mary Beth and I met in late elementary school, but I would say that our friendship really took off when we were in middle school. We had a ton of fun, a lot of memories, whether it was sleepovers or just being at church events.
The friendship that started really young has carried through into adulthood. We went to school together, we played sports together, traveled through youth group together, so we did summer camps and leadership retreats here at New Heights.
She was there for a lot of my growing up. I have a hard time separating Mary from those years of my life. But Mary has been there with me through those pivotal moments in my life. She's been there with the birth of my daughter, the birth of my son. She was my maid of honor at my wedding.
For sure, when I think of my formative years of faith, just coming to understand who God is, what it means to follow Him, even trying to understand kind of the mysteries of things like prayer, Mary Beth is intertwined with all those memories of the foundations of my faith. Growing up as little girls, you dream about the future and think of your wedding and what your family might look like someday, where you might live. Mary Beth comes from a long legacy of faith, and it was not uncommon for her in our growing up years to declare that maybe she would never get married, maybe she would go be like her grandma and her aunt and be a missionary. And so in our early 20s, when the rest of us started to get married, Mary Beth was a faithful friend. She was in our weddings and very supportive, but it was still kind of unclear what her future held, and if maybe she would end up on the mission field. She moved away for a time, took care of her grandma in her aging years, and shortly after we turned 30, I would say, she met Jared, and it was pretty clear at that point she was not going to Africa.
When she moved back, she was on some dating apps, and the whole time I was thinking about one person in particular, Jared, who is one of my husband's longtime friends, and my only concern in having them meet was that they might just die of laughter, because they both love to laugh, sometimes to the point of tears.
We met, it was middle of summer, August, at Nathan and Beth's house. A bunch of us friends were over there just hanging out and barbecuing and feeding our faces, and but we didn't really get a chance to interact a lot. I think Beth had kind of nudged me a couple times. She just really was like, dude, you know, like get off the seat, do something. Or I was like, okay, I'll call her. And I called Mary Beth, and we ended up having coffee on a Saturday morning. It was, it wasn't anything fancy, but we had a really good time for a couple hours. And
it was really fun because Mary came over after their first date, and I got to hear all about it. You could just tell they were smitten with each other. I
was really excited after that, but it just so much of life was happening too. But we ended up going out on a couple more dates, and might not even been a couple more, but even after that, we were just together. And the rest is history.
It wasn't a surprise to any of us that they eventually got married. It wasn't long after that Mary and Jared got married that they had Dwayne and then Henry. And that was a really fun part of our friendship, is just getting to be moms together, something that we'd always talked about from our years growing up. We're finally seeing these dreams of ours come true. Right here in this room, I would host play dates, get to watch Dwayne and Henry grow up and play, and they are some of my kids' best friends. We do a lot of life together. And of course, when COVID came, it was a challenge on how to stay connected and to be careful and cautious. But we tried to stay connected through everything with your phone, social media, apps like Marco Polo, ways of just trying to stay connected. My kids would make videos to her kids.
when COVID hit, and it kind of changed the landscape of friendship for everybody. In some ways, Mary Beth and I were well practiced. We had already had many years of living apart from each other and keeping in touch here in Vancouver. So text and phone calls, and there's a video messaging app called Marco Polo, and a group of us that actually goes all the way back to Sunday school days. We have a group chat that we were regularly sending messages to each other on. In October 2021, the Delta variant had hit Clark County. COVID had been around at this point for over a year, but I would say there was a heightened anxiety for me personally and others I knew. It was the first time that I knew of someone who had died of COVID. One of my close friends had lost 2 cousins that fall, actually. Both were young parents. It was just an era of COVID where it was still, schools were closed, mask mandate was in place. Now we kind of talk about COVID pretty casually, like, oh, I just tested positive, or people post about on Facebook, we were homesick with COVID. But in October of 2021, it was still kind of in that phase where we weren't really talking about it super publicly. And I remember Mary Beth texting us that Jared had COVID, and she was concerned. She also knew of people who had been really ill with COVID from the Delta variant, and there was just kind of a heightened anxiety for all of us, knowing that this young dad had COVID. And so there was concern for Jared and for Mary Beth. It was suspected that she had COVID right when it first hit in March of 2020. She has a pre-existing condition with asthma, and so there was concern if she gets it again, what would this be like? And it was just, I want to say that weekend that we found out Mary Beth had tested positive for COVID as well.
Mary was very anxious about it. We'd been in COVID season for what felt like quite a while, but still, with the Delta variant, things were just different, and I think we all shared her fears a bit. She wasn't really letting on that she was getting sick initially, but when she would send us videos of herself through Marco Polo, that's when we knew that she wasn't quite feeling well. And it was hard because she wasn't totally forthright with the seriousness of how she was feeling until we found out that she was taken by ambulance to the hospital.
Really just, put the boys to bed like normal, and nothing was really, for them, they just woke up and Mom was at the hospital.
That week was full of concern. I mean, for sure it was a moment of, whoa, COVID just got very personal. This is one of my closest friends. She's in the hospital. She's a young mom. I mean, it's kind of shocking when you feel young and you're just thinking, how is she actually sick enough with COVID to be in the hospital? My biggest prayer during all of that was, Lord, don't let her be intubated. At that time, every media outlet was talking about kind of the statistics around being intubated. And if you were intubated, it was about a 50-50 chance you were going to survive. And that's a really terrifying statistic. So we were hopeful, and she'd send us text messages throughout the day. Most of the time she was in a proned position, so she wasn't super communicative, but when she was upright, like for food or other moments during the day, she would send us short Marco Polos, and she was classic Mary Beth. They were funny and kind of irreverent, and when she could, just giving us some indication of how she was doing. This is again that phase of COVID where there's nobody in the hospital, so she was completely alone in there, which was hard. It was hard on Jared. It was hard for us. When your friend's sick and in the hospital, you want to go visit, and you can't. And
I was really anxious with just kind of over this whole thing, but yeah, it was tough talking with her in the evening or even during the day, just to try and figure out what's going on, where's she doing, how's she doing, because I can't go and physically be with her, and there's nothing I can do. There's nothing at all that I can do to help make her better.
The hard part too is that she's Mary Beth. Because of her faith being so rooted in the Lord, and her faith is so strong, and it made sense for us to be scared, but she never really let on to her fear for herself, she would definitely ask for our prayers, and we were more than happy to give those up to the Lord and to pray for her.
Her constant request was for prayer.
Just wanted to give a little update, show my face, miss you all, keep praying, and I wish tomorrow I was gonna be waking up in bed, heading to church in the morning, but won't be able to do that tomorrow, but maybe next week, who knows?
She was having a really hard time being away from her husband and her boys because Jared was just getting better himself.
We were sending her scripture, and we were praying all the time that God would, his presence would be felt by her, and she expressed how the peace she did feel as she did feel God's nearness, and just the surprising ways he answered those prayers. There was a gal in her community group who was a nurse, and she found a reason to pass by Mary Beth's door, open the door, and throw some candy at her. I think it was a bag of peanut M&Ms.
Girls, I've been sitting in here moping, missing my boys, just praying. And then there's a gal in our community group who works here at Legacy, and she just threw these through the door.
It's such a small gesture, but in that moment of intense anxiety and isolation, it really felt like a huge answer to prayer. There was another Marco Polo message I remember getting where Mary Beth said her respiratory therapist visited her that morning, and she really wasn't improving, but he was able to just tell her, he mentioned that he had been praying for her through the night. His prayer and dependence on God meant so much to Mary Beth.
All that saying, I'm doing okay, just tired, damn tired. So I had a really nice RT guy just come in, and he's like, I just want you to know I was praying for you all last night, and you did so good on the CPAP, and he's like, I'm a man who believes in prayer. And I cried again. I was like, thank you so much. Let me catch my breath.
Mary Beth and I we were usually talking at least once a day. She called me, and we knew the possibility of the ventilator was coming, or was there, and that the likelihood was high. And then when she called me, it was tough for me. I think obviously she had been told and had time to at least process for the phone call. So it was she was talking to me, and I was having to process it with her telling me, and that was hard. Because I knew that we wouldn't be able to talk anymore. It was hard to really say goodbye to each other, even though she was still there and just was going to go to sleep. It was really tough to have her not be able to call me call me and just to be able to chat about what she was struggling with or how she was doing.
As the week went on, it became clear that she wasn't getting better. Her blood oxygen numbers were not good. She was needing higher amounts of oxygen. One of the last Marco Polos I got from her was they had moved her to high flow oxygen. And it was hard to see this video of her just with such intense machinery around her helping her. The day after she sent that video, I was in a meeting at work and got the text from Jared, her husband, that she'd been intubated.
I actually had the boys here with me, and we were playing outside when I got the text that Mary had been intubated. And that statistic of 50%.
felt really real.
It was hard because in those moments, I remember thinking that I had to remind myself that she wasn't gone, but the outlook didn't look great. And that what I might be looking at is a new reality of me caring for her boys long term, not knowing if Mary was going to survive.
I left the meeting and called Jared immediately, and he was struggling to talk. The doctor had instructed him and Mary to kind of say their goodbyes because the realities were that so many people weren't waking up from the sedation that's required when you're intubated. That was a really hard day. After work, my husband and I went to Bethany's house and we met Jared there.
Shortly after Mary was intubated, we'd already been communicating as a group, Amy, myself, and several others, but my home kind of became a place where we would gather together just to get information from Jared or just to come and pray and be together. It was just such a challenging time, and the one thing that I knew that Mary kept asking for when she was awake was for our prayers. And I knew that that's what we could give to her. If we couldn't do anything else, because you feel helpless when someone's in the hospital and you know that nobody can go and be with that person, you give them what you can. And she asked for prayers, and so that's what we kept telling people to do, is just to keep praying fervently. And the scriptures that we shared seemed just so fitting, given Mary's personality and how much she was a prayer warrior for everybody else.
Mary Beth had been away from her boys for a week, but with her being sedated and intubated, we were realizing that this was going to be a longer haul event, and Jared needed to work. He had recovered from COVID at this point. So we needed to put some kind of plan in place to help provide meals. Bethany and some of Mary Beth's other friends began working on a childcare plan to help with the kids. Fear was pretty strong at that point of just recognizing this is scary. More and more people were aware that she was sick, and it became clear that trying to keep people updated just via text was going to be a challenge. So Bethany and I created a Facebook page and kind of set up the first post with asking people to bring meals, and we both, wanted to share a verse. I wanted to share a verse of hope. I wanted to share a verse of healing. I wanted to share a verse of God's a miracle worker, and Bethany was insistent on the verse that we should share. And there's a verse about prayer. It's from Ephesians, and it just says, "And pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. With this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the Lord's people." It was a verse that honestly that night didn't make a ton of sense to me as to why Bethany was so insistent that that's what we share. But in the coming days, it became clear how much prayer was going to become a part of my life.
I had so many people reaching out asking for information or wanting to pray and how to pray, and it was really hard in those days because I would have people around that didn't necessarily have their full faith and hope in the Lord. And I knew the reality that my prayers weren't necessarily for Mary's healing, but my prayers was just that we would know that God was near. That even while Mary was asleep, that she would know that God was near. That Jared would know that God is near. And having to be honest with some friends who would say what Jared needed was Mary Beth, my response to them was, Jared needs Mary. It doesn't need Mary. Jared needs Jesus. It might not be that we get Mary back, but God knows exactly what Jared needs. And it might not be her. And I knew the reality of that, And I trusted the Lord in that, even though that meant that I was surrendering my best friend to the Lord and whatever outcome that He had planned. And that was hard for some friends to wrestle with. They didn't quite understand and have that same hope that I have, that the Lord provided with me. But yeah, the idea of surrendering Mary never felt great, but my trust in the Lord was what I had to lean hard on.
The Sunday after Mary Beth was intubated, I was at the Battleground campus where I attend, and standing in the lobby, and I saw Jared walk in with their little boys, Dwayne and Henry. And honestly, I was shocked he was there. Just in such a crisis moment for his family, that this young dad showed up at church with his little boys. It's no small feat to get kids to church. And
I knew that's where we needed to be, just to help with some normalcy for Dwayne and Henry, and just to keep them so we're not just in the house stuck, but also because of family, or church family that's there, and how much they care for them. And but yeah, it was really good to go, and it was kind of freeing emotionally, to be able to lean on Amy and Mark Forstrom especially.
we sat through the service, and I'll be honest, I don't remember the message, but I remember the final song. We sang the blessing, which comes from a scripture in Numbers. It talks about the Lord's favor being upon you, and that he's for you. It talks about God being in front of you and behind you, His favor being with you, His presence being with you. And we were praying so fervently for Mary, as she's alone and now intubated and sedated, that she would feel the Lord's nearness. And the song goes on to say, may His favor be upon you and your children for 1,000 generations. And Jared was sitting in between me and another one of Mary Beth's friends, Sarah. We just wept as we sang that song, just praying for Mary Beth's kids, and having to recognize that with or without Mary Beth, what those little boys needed was Christ, and that our prayer was that God's favor would be upon them, and whether they had their mom in the future or not, that they would be kids who knew the goodness of God.
The hard days ahead was just after Mary got on the ventilator, because she wasn't recovering. All the numbers that they were doing with the machines had to keep being increased. Her need was greater, but she wasn't receiving what she needed. And then it became apparent that if she didn't get more immediate help through the ECMO machine, she wasn't likely to survive.
With intubation, the hope was that it would give Mary Beth's lungs some time to heal, just a break. And unfortunately, that was not happening. The reports from Jared and Mary Beth's parents were that there was no sign of improvement. And those were really hard words to hear, because you kept hearing for just any improvement, and there just wasn't. Around this time, we became aware of a machine I had never heard of called the ECMO machine, and essentially what intubation is to the lungs, ECMO is to the heart. It takes the blood out of the body, does the exchange of oxygen, and gives the heart a chance to rest. So it's kind of the ultimate life support. And there became, with her family and Jared, some discussion about whether Mary should be on ECMO. And as the doctors conferenced with them, the challenge was there were no machines available. And ECMO is this really specialized machine that requires a team of people to monitor the patient 24/7. So it's not just the issue of the machine, it's the issue of the staffing. And it was really hard to know that there may be hope with this machine, but that there was nothing available for Mary.
During that whole time, they were trying to move her to Oregon anyways to get her, or anywhere that an ECMO system was going to be available. And
it had been about 2 weeks since she'd been hospitalized. She'd been sedated for probably 5 days at this point, and the ECMO machine wasn't available. She was declining rapidly. I think it was a Monday night that the hospital had reached out to the family and talked about a chaplain visiting Mary. And at this point, we were really coming to terms with the fact that end of life was very likely near. Tuesday morning, I was at work. At this point, the New Heights staff was well aware of Mary Beth's circumstance, and I really couldn't go more than a few feet in the office without somebody stopping to tell me they were praying. And it was a low, hard morning, just wondering if I was going to be getting a phone call any minute letting me know that Mary Beth had passed. And instead, a text came from Jared. It said, "An ECMO machine's available and the team's on their way." I mentioned that there's a whole process, team involved to run these machines. And so a team from Portland was on their way to the hospital here in Salmon Creek.
ECMO was a huge answer to prayer. We knew that if Mary didn't get some more help, that she wasn't going to survive. ECMO came at the right moment. And it was hard because she crossed the river. She wasn't here in Clark County anymore, so it felt like she was further away, but our prayers just continued. It was so hard to experience her birthday while she was asleep, but we had a huge gift of getting to use Zoom to get to see her, but that was really hard because it was the first time seeing her in that state with all the tubes. We did a horrible rendition of Happy Birthday through our tears and through the wonderful way of communicating through through the internet, but we sang Happy Birthday to her, and huge blessing was that Jared got to go and be with her actually on her birthday. He hadn't seen her since October 17th, and so finally on November 5th he got to see her for the first time.
As the weeks went on and it was clear Mary Beth was not improving, I began to experience kind of what the Apostle Paul's talking about when he says praying without ceasing. Mary Beth was just top of my mind all the time. There was just a desperation in my prayers. I wanted healing. That was undeniable. And I was boldly asking for healing, but there was also a recognition and a surrender to the Lord that we were not in control. It was just so evident, the limitations of medicine and the realities that life is fragile, and Mary Beth's life was in the Lord's hands. And so as I prayed for her boys, prayed for Jared especially, that he would have hope in Christ, a part of hope from healing.
But the days ahead were really rocky. She was having issues with the ECMO machine. It was getting bogged down. There was just issues with her heart. She was having infections in her kidneys, so she had to go on dialysis at one point. There was an instance where she had cardiac arrest, and per the protocol of being on an ECMO machine, they needed to move the body from laying on your back to laying on your stomach. And the doctors were really concerned about moving her and if that could potentially send her back into cardiac arrest. Jared was called to come to the hospital that day, and they had also extended it to Mary's parents, Greg and Shannon, and that was the first time that they were admitted, and understanding that they were calling them because it was a chance to say goodbye.
The lowest point was the Friday of Thanksgiving weekend. That was kind of generally the lowest that everybody had really gotten that was on her medical team. I was getting a daily phone call from the doctors, and just as a daily update, but they were talking about just nothing else that they can do. It should be time to either start to come and say goodbye and let people know that she's not going to make it. That hit me really hard.
On their drive to the hospital, they called me and wanted to talk about the situation. I don't think it was necessarily to make me aware of what was happening, but to talk through the reality of what they were walking into. And maybe how I might suggest them to think about the situation with if Mary's body could handle being resuscitated, if she did go into cardiac arrest again, and if she could handle it, or if they should just consider letting her go. It was shortly after Thanksgiving that she had a physician that came back on who was with her at the beginning of her ECMO journey, and the decision was made to wake her up. And it was so confusing to us. I mean, we didn't understand ECMO to understand why they would want to remove sedation. And our biggest fear was that they were waking her up to say goodbye. Was it waking her up so that she would have a chance to say goodbye to her husband and her kids, or waking her up to this horrible reality that we'd been living in?
It really felt like we're waking her up to tell her she was gonna die.
When I started to wake up, I was still very heavily medicated. So what I feel like was my first memory was waking up and a nurse was there and it was celebratory, like it worked. It worked. And I believe in that memory, Jared was there as well. The truth is, waking up took a very long time. It's kind of like my brain shifts, like it goes back, and over here are the memories of waking up and the confusion, the fear.
As the sedation was lifted, I was hugely comforted by the fact that both her mom and Jared were allowed in the hospital room at this point. So we knew she wasn't totally alone, because the reality she was waking up to was far different than what she fell asleep to months earlier.
It was just so exciting when you seen her open her eyes for the first time, even though nothing that she's going to remember, but when I got to see that was pretty special.
And the reality is, it was still very touch and go. Her health was incredibly fragile. When we tried to give updates to friends and family, we crafted those really carefully, because while she was awake and there was so much hope in that, it was still so unknown what the future was going to hold.
As the weeks progressed and the sedatives were removed and she was more alert and awake, it was still really hard, but we would catch glimpses of Mary from what Jared and Shannon would share with us. Because of her being intubated, she couldn't speak, and so she was mouthing words. But over time, we gradually got to see signs of life coming back.
I think they started to wake me up around the beginning of December, and I think I have pretty clear memories starting at Christmas. I have lots of memories in that 2 weeks, but very clear memories from Christmas on.
I remember the day is Christmas, and I was just sitting in front of the TV and my phone rang and it said Mary Beth Wubben. The funny part was that it hung up. Only to get a phone call back, but it was a FaceTime, and there on the screen was my best friend. And it was just such a huge gift. I couldn't hear her, she was still mouthing words. But it was such a relief just to get to see her, and she kept telling me to not cry. Obviously, she couldn't understand what all of us had been through on this side while she was asleep.
Recovery? Oh, recovery. Nobody knew what recovery looked like. There were very clear things. I have to be able to get off of ECMO. Is my body going to be strong enough, and are my lungs going to work well enough that I can get off ECMO? Are my lungs going to be strong enough and work well enough to get off the ventilator? The doctors and nurses would come in and make it sound so simple. We need to get you off ECMO. We need to get you off the ventilator. We need to get you walking, and then you can get home. And for me, home meant back to my boys.
It was a pretty incredible day in January of 2022 when Mary Beth got off ECMO. It was one of those moments where it was just such a tangible answer to our prayer, and honestly, a really shocking moment.
I remember the first time physical therapy came in to work with me, and they're like, we got to get you up and standing. And I was like, no problem. And it took 4 or 5 people to sit me up, and part of that is there's so much going on with my body. I was connected to so many things. So they sat me up, and when you haven't sat up in a couple months, your world spins, and they're like, okay, we're gonna count to 3, and then you're gonna stand up. So I was like, okay. And they went 1, 2, 3, and I flung my body forward, and I didn't even move a millimeter. I had no strength. And so to have this very harsh reality of I cannot will myself enough to stand up. I have a very long road ahead of me. Was kind of scary. And all you want to do is get home to see your kids, and everybody around you is saying, we don't know when that will be. And, some people would say, it'll probably take you a couple months. You'll probably still be here in the spring. And at this time, it's just after Christmas. And this reality of cannot take that long. I did everything that they threw at me.
We just kept seeing more and more great signs that she was coming back to us, knowing that her health still was very poor and very fragile, but we could see Mary fighting. It wasn't the machines doing the work anymore, it was her. And the Lord sustaining her, because she knew that we were praying. She was now awake and able to understand that we were just covering her in prayers.
I had 100 pictures up in my room that my husband had put up, and I'd stare at those pictures. I stared at Bible verses. I just said one day at a time. One day at a time.
In February, after 119 days in the hospital, I got to be there. She was reunited with her boys.
I could not get out of there fast enough. And I was very overwhelmed to see my boys. But that moment of being wheeled out and seeing them and having them run towards me was just undescribable. It was indescribable. And then all of a sudden, you're in a car and you're driving home. It's all very surreal. It's very surreal.
It was a shockingly short amount of time that Mary Beth was released from rehab that she walked in the doors of the Battleground campus. And it was a really special day. She walked into the lobby and people in the lobby just parted. I mean, it was like a celebrity had shown up because we had all prayed so fervently for her.
The first Sunday coming back to church, I wasn't sure if I could physically walk into the building. I was still really weak, But I really wanted to get back to church. I had my little walker that had a bench, so if I needed to sit down, I could. I was so excited to go back and just start living life again. And so going back to church that first Sunday was really like, I get to live life again. I get to live life again. It was deeply humbling to find out the magnitude that people were praying and how important it was for them to be praying. And it was like friend of a friend to family of, it just felt like it went on and on and on. It was just deeply humbling to know that people that were so far removed from me were so faithfully praying.
Yeah, it was really nothing short of miraculous that the work that he tied into other people that had never met Mary. There's just even more so no doubt in my mind of his existence and what he does.
I know for me, I will never pray the same again. The way I experienced the power of God through prayer is something that has impacted me for the rest of my life. Through prayer, I came to a different understanding of God's sovereignty, a different understanding of my need to surrender, and just a different understanding of his presence through prayer.
I know that he's there, that I know that he's taking care of and working on his plan, and that his plan is good. Even now, in each moment, he still works in people's lives, not the person that may be sick or the people that are struggling with the person that's dealing with something, but in the people, around.
I had countless people tell me that they've never prayed for someone so hard in their whole life. And I'll admit that I've never prayed so hard for something or someone in all of my life, even with my own challenges. Mary Beth's story has completely superseded all of those others in my past. But the things that I still think about today is that I knew that what I needed most was Jesus. Whether we get our hope or not, he is our hope.
It's not my story, but it's God's story. And it's not about my healing, but it's about God at work, and God at work in our community, and God's far greater purpose than my little life. And that this story is far bigger than just God bringing me through COVID. There are so many stories in this one story.